The evening sun was slowly sinking behind the tall buildings, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The streets of the city were alive with activity. Cars honked, shopkeepers closed their stores, and people hurried to get home. Among the crowd was a young woman named Amara. She was dressed with elegance, carrying a small shopping bag from one of the most expensive stores in town. Her graceful walk and confident look made her stand out in the busy street. She belonged to a family that was respected and well known. Her father was a lawyer who had fought many cases for justice, and her mother worked with children in charities. Amara had grown up in an environment where honesty, discipline, and dignity were the most important values. She had just finished shopping for a friend's birthday and was walking toward the parking lot. Her shoes clicked softly against the pavement, and the golden light of the setting sun made her skin glow. She was proud of who she was, proud of her family, and proud of the way she carried herself. But that evening was about to bring her face to face with a situation she never imagined. A police officer named Miller was standing near his patrol car, sipping from a paper cup of coffee. He was known in the area, not for kindness, but for being rough and intimidating. Many people avoided crossing paths with him. His presence brought fear instead of comfort. Miller's eyes noticed Amara immediately. He saw her elegant clothes, her designer bag, and her calm confidence. To him, she looked like someone who didn't belong on these streets, at least not in his mind. His thoughts were clouded with pride, prejudice, and greed. Amara felt his gaze but kept walking, determined not to let anything disturb her peace. Yet within a few steps, she heard the sharp sound of his whistle. "Hey, you! Stop right there," Miller called out. His voice was commanding, the kind of tone that made most people freeze instantly. Amara paused, her heart beating a little faster, but she turned with steady composure. She had been taught since childhood never to show fear, even when she felt it inside. "Yes, officer," she asked politely, her voice calm but alert. Miller walked toward her slowly, circling her like a predator around its prey. "What are you doing here? You look out of place," he said, his eyes narrowing at her bag. Amara blinked, surprised by the question. "I was shopping. I'm heading to my car now," she explained. She even lifted her bag slightly to show the store's name, as if proof was needed for such a simple act. But Miller wasn't interested in her explanation. His mind had already made a decision. "You know, people like you get into trouble often," he muttered, his voice lower now, almost threatening. He stepped closer, lowering his coffee cup on the car roof. Amara could smell the strong scent of his uniform and the metallic clink of the handcuffs hanging at his side. She felt a chill run through her, but she held her ground. The sidewalk was quiet for a moment, though cars rushed past on the main road. A few pedestrians glanced their way but quickly looked down, unwilling to get involved. Miller studied her handbag and her jewelry. They gleamed under the streetlight that had just flickered on. His greedy eyes lit up. "Show me what you've got in that bag," he demanded. Amara's eyebrows furrowed. "Excuse me," she asked softly, unable to believe what she was hearing. "I said, open it." "I need to check if you're carrying anything illegal," Miller insisted, his tone harsher now. He placed one hand on his belt, where his badge shone under the dim light. Amara's heart raced, but she knew something wasn't right. She had read about people being stopped unfairly, but experiencing it firsthand was different. She inhaled deeply, reminding herself of her father's words, "In moments of fear, let your mind be sharper than your emotions." She slowly reached into her coat pocket and felt her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she steadied them. Without making it obvious, she unlocked it with a single touch, pretending to adjust her sleeve. Meanwhile, Miller grew impatient. "Come on. Hand it over, unless you want to spend the night in jail," he said firmly. His voice was rising now, making Amara more uneasy. She thought quickly. If she resisted openly, things could turn dangerous. But if she stayed quiet, he might succeed in his plan. She had to find another way, one that didn't rely on force, but on wisdom. So she tilted her phone just enough to start the recording function, slipping it into her shopping bag with the camera facing outward. Every word, every gesture was being captured without Miller noticing. With a calm face, she replied, "Officer, I have nothing illegal. These are birthday gifts. I worked hard to earn the money for them." Her words were simple, but her tone carried dignity. Miller smirked. "Hard work, huh? Let me be the judge of that." He reached out toward her bag, but Amara stepped slightly back. She didn't shout, she didn't argue, she just created distance, forcing him to use words instead of actions. "Why are you treating me this way?" she asked, her voice still calm, though inside her chest, her heart hammered. Her question seemed to annoy him even more. "Don't play smart with me," he snapped. "If you don't cooperate, I'll charge you with obstruction. You think anyone will believe you over me?" His words were sharp like knives. But Amara remembered her father telling her stories of cases where people thought they had no power, yet their truth had been stronger than lies. That thought gave her courage. The street around them felt tense. The sound of footsteps, distant honks, and the hum of the city all faded into the background. For Amara, the world had shrunk to this single moment, a test of patience, courage, and intelligence. She knew she couldn't let fear control her. Standing tall, she looked him in the eye and said firmly, "Officer, I respect the law. But I know my rights." Her words startled him for a second, as if he hadn't expected resistance from her. The camera in her bag continued recording, silently capturing the truth. As the wind brushed against her face and the city lights blinked around her, Amara realized that this encounter wasn't just about her shopping bag. It was about her dignity, her right to walk freely, and her refusal to be silenced by fear. Miller, blinded by his own arrogance, didn't realize that the trap he was setting for her was slowly closing around him. Instead, the cool evening breeze moved gently through the street as Amara stood facing the officer. Her body appeared calm, but inside her mind was racing. The recording on her phone continued quietly in her bag. Every second, every word spoken was being saved, though the officer had no idea. She reminded herself not to let fear control her. She had to stay steady. Officer Miller shifted his weight from one foot to the other, staring at her bag with greedy eyes. His voice turned firmer, almost impatient. "Give me that bag now. Don't make this harder than it has to be," he said, holding out his hand. The street lamp above cast a shadow across his face, making him look even harsher. Amara glanced around. A couple walked by quickly, lowering their heads as if they saw nothing. A man at a bus stop looked in their direction but turned away. She realized no one was going to help her directly. That thought made her spine tighten, but it also strengthened her resolve. If she was going to get out of this, it had to be through her own smart choices. "I don't understand why you're asking for my bag," Amara replied in a polite but firm tone. "I have done nothing wrong. I've only been shopping." Miller chuckled, though there was no humor in his laugh. "You think your pretty words are going to get you out of this? Let me tell you something out here, no one cares about excuses. I can take you in right now, and people will believe me before they believe you." Amara's lips tightened. His words were heavy, but she remembered her father's lessons about how the law worked. She knew that people like Miller thrived on fear and silence. If she gave in easily, he would win. But if she could hold her ground, she might expose him. She let out a calm breath and said softly, "Officer, I respect the police. But I also respect myself. If you're going to take me in, please explain the reason clearly so I can understand." Her calmness only made him angrier. He stepped closer, towering over her. His hand moved as if he might grab her bag directly. But Amara shifted slightly, keeping the space between them. In her heart, she prayed for wisdom. Miller lowered his voice, making his words sound more like a threat whispered in the air. "Look, girl, I'm giving you a choice. Hand it over, or I'll make sure you regret standing here tonight. You think your family name means anything? It won't protect you when I'm the one writing the report." Amara felt a wave of fear, but she refused to let it show. Instead, she gently touched her phone through the thin fabric of her bag. She was glad it was still recording. His threats were being captured clearly. Suddenly, an idea flashed in her mind. She remembered her father telling her, "When you are in danger, do not panic. Use your mind. There is always a way to make truth louder than lies." Amara adjusted her bag slightly and tilted her wrist. Without him noticing, she swiped her screen with her finger inside the bag and pressed a single contact her father's number. The call went through silently. Now, not only was the phone recording, but her father could also hear everything happening. Miller, thinking she was hesitating, leaned closer. "Good. You're learning to listen. Now give me the bag." Amara held it close to her chest. "No, officer. I cannot give you what belongs to me without a reason." Her voice was steady, but her heart was racing so fast she thought it might burst. On the other side of the call, her father's voice didn't speak, but he listened carefully. He knew something was wrong. Within moments, he signaled a colleague from his office, and together they began making calls first to trusted contacts, then to local authorities who would not ignore the truth. Meanwhile, Miller's patience snapped. He reached out roughly and tried to snatch the bag. Amara stepped back quickly, clutching it tighter. "Stop resisting," he shouted, as if trying to make her look guilty. His loud voice echoed on the street, drawing the eyes of a few more people. A young man pulled out his phone, recording from across the road. Another woman paused, watching nervously. For the first time, Miller realized his actions were not hidden. But his pride pushed him further. "If you don't stop, I'll cuff you right here," he barked, pulling out the metal cuffs from his belt. The cold steel glimmered under the light, a symbol of authority. Amara's chest rose and fell quickly, but she forced her face to stay calm. "Officer, please. I haven't broken any law." "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice carrying both fear and dignity. Miller didn't answer her question. Instead, he hissed, "You'll learn not to talk back. You think being rich and dressed up makes you untouchable? Out here, I'm the law." Those words sealed his fate. They were not only heard by Amara's father through the call but also captured by her phone's recording and by the stranger across the road filming with his device. The evidence was piling up like bricks in a wall that Miller himself was building around his future. Amara saw the bus arriving near the stop where the man with the phone stood. More people stepped down, noticing the tension. The crowd wasn't large, but there were enough eyes now to make Miller uneasy. He tried to cover his tracks fine. "You want a reason? I suspect you stole something. That's why I need to check your bag," he said louder, as if performing for the audience. Amara's heart steadied. She now had more strength because she knew the truth was on her side. "That's not true, officer. I purchased these items legally. I have receipts inside this bag." "You are accusing me unfairly," she said clearly, making sure others could hear. Her voice carried through the air like a bell ringing in a quiet room. People started whispering. Some looked uneasy, others curious. A young woman in the crowd whispered, "She sounds like she's telling the truth." Miller's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected her to push back so calmly in public. His greed burned, but his control was slipping. He realized too many people were watching now. Yet, instead of stopping, he made a final mistake. He tried again to grab her arm, pulling her roughly. The crowd gasped. Phones were lifted higher, recording everything. Amara, though frightened, didn't scream. She looked him in the eye and said firmly, "You are going too far. You are misusing your power." Those words, spoken with such calm bravery, hit harder than any resistance could have. Miller froze for a moment, realizing that the situation was spiraling beyond his control. At that exact moment, Amara's father, who had been listening silently to the call, dialed a higher authority he trusted. Within minutes, officers from another unit were already rushing toward the location. Amara held her ground. Her voice remained steady, her spirit unbroken. She had not fought with anger, she had fought with calm courage. Miller, blind to the trap around him, still believed he could intimidate her. But the truth was now bigger than his threats. The evening air grew heavier. The noise of the city seemed to pause as if the whole street was waiting for what would happen next. Amara, standing with her bag close to her chest, whispered silently in her heart, "Hold on. Help is coming." The crowd on the street grew more alert as the scene unfolded. Amara stood tall, clutching her bag to her chest, while Officer Miller's hand gripped her arm. His expression was filled with impatience and pride. He thought his uniform would silence everyone, but the opposite was happening. The whispers around them were growing louder, and more phones were now recording the moment. Amara's heart pounded, but her face stayed calm. She reminded herself again of her father's words, "The calmest person in the storm always sees the way out first." She drew strength from that memory. Though the officers gripped her arm, she looked directly at him and spoke clearly, "You are treating me unfairly. I know my rights. You cannot take what does not belong to you." Her voice carried across the small crowd, and people murmured in agreement. A woman in the back whispered, "She's brave." Another man nodded and raised his phone higher, capturing every detail. Officer Miller's jaw tightened. His pride wouldn't let him back down. "Enough," he growled. "You're resisting, and that's an offense. I'll take you to the station myself." He pulled harder on her arm, trying to drag her toward his patrol car. Amara took a step back, steady but unyielding. "If you believe I have broken the law, then follow the law and tell me my charge." "Don't use threats," she replied firmly. Her words surprised him. She wasn't yelling or panicking, she was calm, intelligent, and strong. That unsettled him more than if she had shouted. He wanted her frightened, but instead, she stood like a wall against his intimidation. Unknown to Miller, Amara's father was still on the other end of the call, listening carefully. By now, he had contacted trusted officials and local reporters. Word was spreading fast. Meanwhile, Amara shifted her bag slightly, making sure the camera lens of her phone was peeking out just enough. She continued recording, capturing not just his actions but also the voices of the people watching. Evidence was piling up in silence. Miller yanked her arm again. "You think you're smart? You think your family name can save you?" His voice was harsh, his tone dripping with anger. But Amara did not flinch. She looked at him with steady eyes and said, "The truth will save me. That's all I need." Her courage shook him for a moment, but then he forced a laugh. "Truth," he sneered. "Out here, the only truth is what I write in my report." The crowd gasped. His words revealed more than he intended. The young man filming across the street whispered loudly, "He's admitting it himself." Others nodded, their sympathy now clearly with Amara. Miller realized he had spoken too much, but it was too late. Determined to end the situation his way, he reached for her bag again, this time with both hands. Amara pulled back sharply, her voice rising louder than before. "Do not touch my belongings. You are crossing the line." Her clear cry made more people stop to watch. Cars slowed down, drivers leaned out of windows, curious about the commotion. The quiet street had turned into a small stage, with Amara and Miller at its center. Then, suddenly, a familiar sound cut through the tension, the distant wail of sirens. The noise grew louder, echoing off the buildings. Miller froze. His grip on Amara loosened slightly. He turned his head, trying to see where the sound was coming from. Amara felt a rush of relief, though she did not let her guard down. She knew help was near. She straightened her shoulders and said in a calm, firm tone, "It seems others are coming now. Perhaps they will hear my side too." The sirens drew closer until two police cars turned onto the street, their red and blue lights flashing across the scene. The crowd stepped back slightly, creating space. The doors opened, and several officers stepped out quickly. Miller released Amara's arm at once, forcing a smile as he adjusted his uniform. "Finally, back up," he muttered, as if he had called them himself. But his unease was clear in his eyes. The new officers approached, their faces serious. Among them was Captain Harris, a man known for fairness and integrity. He had been contacted directly by Amara's father, who trusted him to handle the situation with justice. Harris looked from Amara to Miller, then at the crowd holding their phones up. "What's happening here?" Harris demanded, his deep voice cutting through the noise. Miller quickly stepped forward. "Sir, this young woman was acting suspiciously. I attempted to question her, but she resisted. I was about to bring her in for obstruction." His words rolled off his tongue smoothly, but his eyes avoided contact with Amara. The crowd erupted in whispers. Some even laughed softly. One man shouted, "That's not true. We saw everything." Another voice called, "He tried to take her bag." Amara took a step forward, her voice calm and clear. "Captain, I have been treated unfairly. I was stopped without reason. He demanded my bag and threatened me. I did nothing wrong. And I have proof." Her words made Miller stiffen. Harris raised an eyebrow. "Proof?" he asked. Amara nodded and carefully pulled her phone from her bag. The recording was still running, capturing every word from the beginning of the encounter. She handed it over. Harris pressed play, and Miller's own voice filled the air. "You think anyone will believe you over me," his voice said on the recording. Then came his other words, "Out here, the only truth is what I write in my report." The crowd fell silent, listening. Every sentence was clear. Every threat undeniable. Harris's face hardened as he listened. He stopped the recording and looked at Miller. "Is this your voice?" he asked firmly. Miller's face turned pale. He stuttered, That's taken out of context." But Harris wasn't convinced. "Context or not, this is unacceptable." He turned to Amara. "Miss, do you have anything else?" Amara lifted her bag again and pulled out the receipts from her purchases. She held them up, showing the date and time. "I was simply shopping. Everything I carry is legal and paid for," she explained. The truth stood clear in front of everyone. The officer had no valid reason for his actions. The crowd murmured louder, many shaking their heads in disapproval. Suddenly, another voice rang out. It was the young man who had been recording from across the street. He stepped forward, holding up his phone. "I recorded the whole thing too," he said confidently. He pressed play, and his video showed Miller grabbing Amara's arm, demanding her bag, and speaking harshly. The angle was clear, the evidence undeniable. Miller's shoulders slumped. His eyes darted around, searching for a way out. But there was none. The truth had surrounded him from every side: Amara's recording, the witnesses, and the crowd's voices. Captain Harris looked at Miller with disappointment. "You've embarrassed this badge," he said firmly. Then he turned to another officer. "Take him into custody." The crowd gasped and then erupted into cheers. People clapped, some even shouted, "Justice!" The sound filled the street. Amara's heart swelled with relief. She had stood her ground, and the truth had been stronger than fear. Miller was stunned as two officers stepped forward, removing his badge and securing his hands with the same cuffs he had once used to intimidate others. His eyes met Amara's for a brief moment, but she did not look away. She held her head high, knowing she had done the right thing. The flashing lights reflected off the buildings as Miller was led to the car. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the story was already alive. People were talking, phones were buzzing, and videos were being shared. Amara's courage had turned into a spark that could not be put out. As Captain Harris walked up to her, he spoke gently. "You were very brave today. Not many people could have stayed so calm." Amara smiled softly, though her eyes still held the weight of what she had endured. "I only did what I had to do," she replied. But deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. What happened on that street would soon echo in courtrooms and newspapers. The truth had been revealed, but justice was yet to be decided. The night after the incident, Amara sat in her room, replaying everything in her mind. Her arm was still sore where Officer Miller had grabbed her, but the ache was nothing compared to the weight of the day. She stared at her phone, watching the recording she had captured. Each word, each threat, and each attempt of intimidation was there, as clear as daylight. The video from the young man across the street had already been shared online, spreading quickly. Messages of support filled her inbox. Friends, neighbors, even strangers sent words of encouragement. Her father entered quietly, carrying a cup of warm tea. His face was stern but proud. "You did well," he said softly, placing the cup on her table. "You were strong, calm, and wise. Because of that, the truth came out." Amara nodded, though her heart still felt heavy. "It was frightening, Dad. For a moment, I thought I wouldn't make it out." He sat beside her and placed a comforting hand on hers. "Fear is natural, Amara. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's standing tall despite it. And you did that." Meanwhile, across town, Officer Miller sat in a holding cell, his mind racing. He had been stripped of his badge, his uniform taken away. For the first time in years, he wasn't the man with power. He was just another person facing the weight of his choices. His arrogance from earlier was gone, replaced by a silent dread. The next morning, the news channels carried the story. Reporters stood outside the station, speaking into cameras. "An officer has been accused of threatening and attempting to take belongings from a young woman," one journalist announced. "Evidence includes video recordings and witness accounts." The case is expected to move quickly through the courts. In Amara's home, her family watched the broadcast. Her mother shook her head sadly. All the years he wore that badge, and he chose to misuse it. He thought he could silence her, but her strength has brought the truth forward. Amara sipped her tea quietly, listening. She felt a mixture of relief and responsibility. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been treated unfairly but didn't have the chance to speak up. Days later, the courthouse buzzed with activity. The steps outside were crowded with reporters, lawyers, and citizens curious about the case. Inside, the air was heavy with anticipation. Amara walked in with her father by her side. She wore a simple dress, her head held high. Though her stomach churned with nerves, she kept her expression calm. As she entered the courtroom, whispers followed her. People admired her bravery. Some even smiled at her reassuringly. Her father placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Remember, you have the truth. Let it speak for itself." On the other side, Miller sat with his defense lawyer, his face pale. The arrogance he once carried was nowhere to be seen. He avoided looking at Amara, his eyes fixed on the table before him. The uniform that once gave him power was gone. Now he was just a man facing justice. The judge entered, and the courtroom rose. Once seated, the trial began. The prosecutor stood, a determined look in her eyes. She presented the case with clarity. "This is not a simple misunderstanding," she declared. "This is a case of abuse of power. The officer used his position to intimidate, threaten, and attempt to take possessions from an innocent woman. We have video evidence, audio recordings, and witness testimony to prove it." She played the recording from Amara's phone. Miller's voice filled the room. "You think anyone will believe you over me? Out here, the only truth is what I write in my report." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The arrogance in his tone was undeniable. Then came the video from the young man. The images were clear: Miller grabbing Amara's arm, demanding her bag, and speaking with threats. The jury watched closely, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Amara was called to the stand. She walked up slowly, her heart beating fast. Sitting down, she folded her hands gently in her lap. The lawyer asked her to recount the events. With a steady voice, Amara described everything from the moment Miller stopped her to the arrival of Captain Harris. She didn't exaggerate, didn't falter. She told the story as it happened, calmly, truthfully, and with dignity. The courtroom hung on her every word. "Did you ever resist the officer violently?" the prosecutor asked. Amara shook her head. "No, I only stood my ground and spoke respectfully. I recorded because I feared what might happen otherwise." Her testimony was powerful. The jury could see she wasn't just a victim, she was a young woman of strength and intelligence. Then came the defense. Miller's lawyer tried to argue that the recording was taken out of context, that Miller only wanted to question her. But the evidence was too strong. Every attempt to twist the story crumbled under the weight of the videos, the receipts of Amara's shopping, and the witnesses who testified in her favor. One by one, people from the crowd that night stepped forward. The young man who filmed said confidently, "I saw everything." She was respectful. He was the one pushing and threatening. A woman added, "I heard her ask for a reason." She stayed calm. He didn't. Each testimony was like another brick in the wall of truth, closing in around Miller. By the time the closing arguments came, the atmosphere was clear. The prosecutor looked at the jury and said, "This is not just about one woman and one officer. This is about what happens when power is abused. If we do not hold him accountable, we send a message that such behavior is acceptable. But if we deliver justice, we remind everyone that the law protects the innocent, not the corrupt." The jury retired to deliberate. Hours passed, but when they returned, the decision was unanimous. "Guilty," the foreman announced. A wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. Amara's eyes filled with tears of relief, though she kept her composure. Her father squeezed her hand proudly. The judge's voice followed, firm and clear: "For abuse of authority, attempted robbery, and misconduct, this court sentences the defendant to 28 years in prison." The room was silent for a moment, then erupted in gasps and whispers. The sentence was heavy, but it carried a strong message. Miller's face crumbled, his pride shattered. He was led away in cuffs, the same cuffs he had once used on others. Amara sat still, her heart beating with a mixture of victory and sadness. She hadn't wanted revenge, she only wanted fairness. And today, fairness had prevailed. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around her, microphones and cameras flashing. One asked, "How do you feel about the verdict?" Amara spoke softly but firmly. "I feel relieved, not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever felt powerless. Today proves that truth can stand against intimidation. No one is above the law." Her words were carried on the evening news, touching hearts across the city. Strangers praised her courage, children looked up to her as a symbol of strength, and her family held her close, proud beyond measure. That night, as she lay in bed, Amara finally let out a deep breath. She thought of the fear she had felt on the street, the weight of Miller's grip on her arm, and the courage it had taken to stand tall. And now, she thought of the courtroom, the verdict, and the sense of peace that came with justice served. The weeks following the trial were filled with change. The city that once seemed too busy to notice injustice was now alive with conversations about courage, truth, and accountability. Newspapers carried Amara's picture on their front pages. Television channels replayed clips of her testimony and the judge's words. On social media, her name trended as people praised her bravery and dignity. At first, Amara found it overwhelming. She never sought fame or recognition. All she wanted that night was to go home safely after shopping. But her calm actions had carried a bigger meaning. People she had never met before sent her messages, saying how her story gave them hope. Some said they had faced unfair treatment but stayed silent out of fear. Others said they now felt encouraged to stand up for themselves with wisdom instead of anger. One morning, while sipping tea in her family's living room, Amara read a letter from a schoolteacher. The teacher wrote, "Your courage is now part of the lessons I teach my students. They need to know that one voice, calm and truthful, can change the world." The words made Amara's eyes fill with tears. She realized her story wasn't just about her, it was about everyone who longed for justice. Her father often reminded her, "You did not only protect yourself, Amara. You reminded people that the law is meant to serve, not to control." That is a powerful gift. The city authorities also began reviewing other cases connected to Officer Miller. Stories emerged of people who had been too frightened to speak up before. Now, with the evidence against him so clear, they stepped forward. Some had been intimidated, others unfairly fined, and a few had even lost jobs because of false reports. Each new testimony showed how deep the misuse of power had gone. Amara's courage had opened a door that allowed many others to walk through. Meanwhile, Amara returned to her daily life. She went back to her studies, continued helping her mother with charity work, and tried to find peace in the ordinary moments. But everywhere she went, people recognized her. At the grocery store, strangers smiled warmly. At the park, a little girl ran up to her and said shyly, "You're the brave lady I saw on TV." Amara bent down and smiled at the child. "Bravery lives in all of us," she told her gently. Despite the praise, Amara remained humble. She knew she had been frightened that night. She knew courage didn't mean she felt no fear, it meant she didn't let fear decide her actions. And that, she realized, was the lesson she wanted others to learn. Months later, Amara was invited to speak at a community center. The hall was filled with young people, parents, and elders. She stood at the podium, looking at the expectant faces. At first, her hands trembled slightly, but then she took a deep breath and spoke. "I never imagined I would stand here before you," she began. "I never planned to become a symbol of anything. That night, I was simply a young woman walking home. But when I was treated unfairly, I remembered the values my parents taught me: calmness, dignity, and faith in truth. I didn't fight with anger. I chose to let truth speak for me. And that made all the difference." The audience listened closely, their eyes fixed on her. Amara continued, "We all face moments where fear tries to silence us. But in those moments, remember your voice matters. Your dignity matters. And no one, no matter their position, has the right to take that from you." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Amara smiled modestly, her heart full. She had turned her painful experience into a message of strength for others. Meanwhile, Officer Miller sat behind prison walls, his life completely changed. The uniform he once wore with pride was gone forever. Inside the prison, he had plenty of time to think about the choices that led him there. The city had moved forward, but his name had become a reminder of what happens when authority is misused. As time passed, Amara noticed positive changes around her. The police department introduced new training programs focused on fairness and accountability. Officers were reminded that their duty was to protect, not to intimidate. Community leaders began holding meetings where citizens could openly share their concerns. Little by little, trust between the people and the police started to rebuild. One evening, as Amara walked through the same street where the incident had begun months earlier, she paused. The street looked the same, cars rushing by, lights glowing, people walking home. But to her, it felt different. It no longer carried the weight of fear, it carried the memory of her strength. She stopped for a moment, looking up at the lamppost under which Miller had first spoken to her. She thought about how scared she had felt, and how close she had come to giving in. Then she smiled softly. That spot was no longer just a place of fear, it was the place where courage was born. Her father joined her on the walk, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her and said, "Do you realize how far you've come? This street once frightened you. Now it reminds you of your strength." Amara nodded. "Yes, Dad. And it reminds me that truth will always find a way to shine." Together, they walked home, the city lights guiding their path. Years later, Amara's story was still remembered. Students studied it in classrooms as an example of standing tall against unfairness. Parents told their children about the young woman who stayed calm in the face of intimidation. And Amara herself continued to live with quiet dignity, never letting pride take over, but always ready to speak when truth needed a voice. The sentence of 28 years given to Officer Miller remained a strong reminder across the city. It was not about punishment alone, it was about the message that no one, not even someone with authority, could escape accountability if they misused their power. Justice had spoken, and its echo remained. Amara's life moved forward, but she carried the memory of that night in her heart. It reminded her that even in the darkest moments, one person's calm courage could light the way for many others. And so, the story of the young woman and the officer was not just a headline, not just a case in the court's files, it became a lesson passed from one generation to another. A lesson that said, stand tall, stay calm, believe in truth, and let courage guide your steps.